Good morning. It's 9 o'clock, and so I'll call this meeting to order. We were there was some traffic issues today, and so we wanted to make sure that we at least had a quorum before we began. Lucky for us, we do. So we're able to start. Regent Boylan, would you mind leading us in the pledge? Oh, I'm sorry. Let's do roll call first. Carrie, could you do roll call for us?
Chair Brooks,
Here.
Vice Chair Ariscata,
There.
Regent Boylan,
Aye.
Regent Brager, Regent Brown. Here. Regent Carvalho. Here. Regent Cruz Crawford. Here. Regent Del Carlo.
Here.
Regent Downs.
Here.
Regent Goodman. Here. Regent McMichael.
Here.
Regent Perkins.
Here.
Regent Tarkanian. You have a quorum present.
Thank you, Carrie. Regent Boylan, would you please lead us in the pledge? Thank you, Regent Boylan. We'll move into public comment. Is there any public comment in Elko?
There is no public comment in Elko.
Thank you. Is there any public comment in Reno?
There is no public comment in Reno.
Thank you. Is there any public comments in Las Vegas? Okay, there's no public comment in Las Vegas, so we'll get started. The reason that we're assembled here is for us to be able to ask our CFO and Chief Internal Auditor questions about anything that has come up of interest regarding the audit from the LCB itself. The idea here is so that we allow enough time for Regents to ask whatever questions they might have, to be able to do their own fact finding, essentially, so that from today, Regents can digest the information, take a look at other potential questions that we may want to ask, and then we'll get back together again in a manner in which we can ask pertinent questions to the presidents of our institutions and their business officers to help clarify anything that we may learn today. And with that, we'll move right into agenda item number 2, which is the legislative audit findings. And we'll hear from Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger.
Good morning, Chair Brooks, Regents. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer. So what I plan to do this morning, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but what I intended to do is, so there's 3 separate audits, as you'll see in your board pack. There's an audit on what we call self-supporting and reserve accounts. There's an audit on capital construction, and then there's an audit on the foundations. And sort of what I plan to do, Mr. Chairman, is just kind of highlight or maybe summarize, I don't know what you want to call it, sort of the findings and recommendations in these 3 audits, and then answer any questions that the Regents may have. So starting, and I guess maybe to start, these 3 audits came about as a result of AB 416, which was a bill in the last legislative session. And that audit directed and really outlined what the legislative auditors were to look at and really focus their efforts in these 3 areas. So I'm going to start with the self-supporting and reserve accounts, and in your board pack and posted online are the 3 audits from the legislature. And so I'm going to start with the self-supporting, and really the scope of this audit focused on financial activity as it relates to self-supporting and reserve accounts. And really, they looked at fiscal years 2018 through fiscal year 21. And I talked about it a little bit at our onboarding about the different accounts. So there's the state operating accounts and self-supporting accounts. So what they really looked at here were those self-supporting accounts. And self-supporting accounts, just to give you a little bit of background, are those accounts that have their own revenue source, essentially. So think of parking, think of residence life, those sorts of things. So these are self-sufficient, if you will, maybe is another way to think about it. So in the audit, there's really two main areas. There's a third area that talks about investment and how we handled some of the budget reductions, but there's no recommendations in there. And that really is a pretty clean, that's the last section in this first audit. There's really nothing in there. So it's really a pretty clean part of the audit. So I'm not going to talk about that unless there's questions. But in the other parts, there's really two main areas that the auditors talked about. And so the first area is, the auditors questioned the use of some funding and in their opinion found some errors in reporting. And they attributed this, and you're going to see this theme, I think, in all of the audits, and they attributed this to insufficient policy and or insufficient oversight. The second area is, in the first audit, is just looking at the reserves. And again, in the auditor's opinion, they stated the reserves were not adequately managed. So jumping into, I guess, the first section of the audit is there was a discussion in the audit about the institution's ability to move funding between self-supporting and state operating budgets. And this is something that is very common and that we do on a regular basis. Now, we do have, and they talked about this a little bit, there is a policy, a board policy that states you cannot make those transfers, or that if you do make those transfers after May 1st, they have to be reported to the board. And we bring those reports to BFF on a regular basis. So one of the things that's in the audit, and it's not a finding, but I bring it up because it may come up in the legislative session, is one of the sections in there, the auditors talk about a policy consideration for the legislature. And I'm just going to read what they wrote because I think it's important for the board to think about and sort of understand as we go into legislative session. It says that the legislature may wish to consider whether NSHE's actions to move expenditures from self-supporting accounts at or near year end and use all state funds meets with legislative intent. Because unlike other state agencies who don't have the ability to do that, we end up, what I would say, maximizing the use of our state funds. And there's nothing wrong with us doing that. But other agencies don't have the opportunity essentially to do that. And the auditors are not saying that our ability to do that is wrong. What they're saying is that this is something that the legislature should consider from a policy standpoint. Now, where the auditors did maybe take exception and highlight some findings and make some recommendations is in examples that they pulled where they felt that we were moving expenditures just to maximize the use of state funds, but in their opinion, at least, there was not a nexus in those expenditures. In other words, state operating budgets are primarily instruction, student support, that sort of things. And they highlighted a few areas where, again, in their opinion, we had moved expenditures. And I think the example they used was payroll costs that were transferred from a research program on the self-supporting side into institutional support. And I guess they felt like that was not done, that there wasn't a strong nexus there. And again, I don't know the details, and I should say that up front about all these audits. I don't have all of the detailed working papers that the auditors are using. So in some of these cases, just like you, I don't know exactly what they are referencing. And in talking to the other business officers, they don't know either. And we've asked the business officers to give us any questions that they have where they want clarification on these issues. And so we're still we're still working through that. And so in that first section where we're talking about, where the auditors are talking about the ability to move money between state and self-supporting accounts, there's really two recommendations there. And one is, and almost all of these recommendations are implementation of new policy or clarifying policy. So the two recommendations in that area are the board should determine if transfers across different spending categories are appropriate, and that we should clarify that policy. And then the other piece, and you're going to see this a lot, you probably saw this a lot in the audit, is to develop system-wide monitoring to ensure that the policy is followed. The next section, they talk about areas where they felt, at least, that we didn't follow state law in some cases. And the first example is where they pointed out where state appropriations did not revert back to the state. So in the Appropriations Act, every 2 years, there's language in there that basically says every agency in the state has to revert unused expenditures. And they pointed to an example of what they called, what we call recharge accounts. And recharge accounts is essentially a cost allocation. Police services in the South, for example, is a recharge that is charged to UNLV, CSN, and Nevada State. And so in this case or in this example that they put in the audit, we had created a recharge account. We had charged the institutions, and the institutions paid that recharge with state funds. And then what they're saying is at the end of the fiscal year, that recharge account had money sitting in it, even though it was transferred from the other institutions. In their opinion, at least, those monies should have reverted back to the state. That's one, I think we had some discussions with the auditors about that, about sort of cost allocation accounts and whether or not once you fund a cost allocation account, if you had to send the money back. In their opinion, at least, you should. The other example that they gave of areas where they didn't feel like we followed the law was, again, this is again a cost allocation that moved state appropriations from the institutions essentially to system administration. And this is through, we do a cost allocation back to the campuses to help pay for the cost of system administration. And in fiscal years 18 through 21, we had 2 institutions that were using state funds to pay that cost allocation, which they should not have been. And in fact, we found that problem back in 21 and we fixed it. So since 21, that has not happened. They're now using self-supporting funds. So again, this is an instance where the auditors looked at it and said, you're moving state appropriations from a campus and you're moving it into system administration. And again, the Appropriations Act has very specific language. You can move appropriations between institutions and between system admin and institutions, but you have to go to interim finance committee to do it. Now, this wasn't a case where we were deliberately moving appropriations. What we were doing is we were collecting a cost allocation to help fund system administration. So the recommendation that came out of this section was again similar to a lot of the other ones: implement controls, including monitoring to ensure compliance with state law. And like I said, the second example there of our cost allocation, we have already fixed that because we identified that last year, and now all institutions are paying that with investment income. So there is no state money moving back and forth.
Excuse me, Andrew Klinger. I have a request that if, as you're going through your reporting, if you could please reference, particularly for the Regents, the pages that you might be on, as in our board pack, as you're going through some of these. Thank you.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I will try and do that. I should have put those page numbers in my notes and I didn't. So I'm going to move on to, let me find the page here.
Right now, we're on bullet 4 of the key findings on page 2 for this auditing self-supporting. So 1, 2, 3, the third paragraph under key findings.
So I'm going to go to. Okay, so I am on, if you're in board pack, I am on page 21, or actually 20 of board pack. And this is under the heading that actually begins on page 19, questionable use of certain student fees. And so let me just talk about a couple of the examples in here. So I think as the board knows, when students pay a registration fee, there are different components to that registration fee. So there's a piece that goes to the state operating budget that really is just for general operational use, instruction, that sort of thing. But then we also have some very specific fees listed in there, student access, general improvement. So the one example that they used was in the audit was the general improvement fees and just how those fees were used. And I'm going to read to you, and this comes out of the Regents handbook, what the handbook says about general improvement fees. So general improvement fees may be expended on goods and services that directly enhance the educational experience of the student body, including advising, counseling, recruiting, orientation, and other general support services. So what the auditors noted is we had 2 institutions that had used general improvement fee and other what they called other restricted fees for athletics and band programs. And their argument was that this was not for, at least in their opinion, this did not enhance the experience of the entire student body because not all students participate in athletics. And so again, as you look at the recommendation, they're essentially recommending that the policy be clarified. The other example that they used is, and again, we have specific fees, differential fees is one, and these are differential fees are specific to certain courses, high cost courses, and it's intended to help pay for those high cost courses. And the auditors pointed out an example where there was an administrative assessment charged on differential fees. So you're essentially taking that students paying that differential fee, say for an engineering course, and now this institution is taking an administrative fee off the top of that. There's currently nothing in policy that prohibits that. But essentially what the auditors called out is if these fees are specific for or for specific purposes, in this case, certain courses, they're arguing we should at least clarify the policy on how the institutions should be able to use those fees. So the recommendation that came out of this section was just that, that the board just clarify intentions regarding acceptable uses of fees. And so I've just given you a couple of examples. There's obviously others in there as well. So moving on to starting on page 22 of board pack, where on the left-hand side, it talks about commingling of revenues creates difficulties in determining whether restricted funds are used appropriately. And this is, and again, the auditors, what they pointed out is that if you're taking a restricted student fee and you're essentially funding a program with that restricted student fee and you have other funding sources in there, because we're not tracking where every dollar goes, what they said is they couldn't tell if we were violating, for example, the board policy where we're holding student fees over a year, because once you put it into an account and it's mixed in with other fees, you can't tell how much of that student fee is sitting in there. So the recommendation that came out of that essentially is to ensure restricted funds are separated from other sources of revenue. It creates more work on the accounting side, but I can understand in order to meet the board's intent of making sure we're using student fees to benefit the students, and we're not sitting on them. That there are potentially better ways to do that. Moving on to page 23, inaccurate and incomplete reporting hinders proper oversight. In one of the reports that they talk about here is the student fee balance report. This is a report that we bring on a regular basis to business finance and facilities. And this is the report that we bring to ensure compliance with the policy that institutions should not hold fees for more than 1 year. And what the auditors found is that what we bring to the board is a very high level report, and it's essentially reported for each institution, but it's reported at the student fee level. In other words, we bring a report that shows you for each institution, the capital fees, the general improvement fees. But what we don't bring to the board is a report that shows each one of the programs underneath there. And so what the auditors found is that as they did their audit, that there were programs underneath there that had we pulled them out individually, that as individual programs, they violated the policy because they contained more than a year's worth of student fees in the balances. But because the report we bring to the board is rolled up, you don't see it. And so they put that under the heading of inaccurate and incomplete reporting. One of the other ones was that May 1st report that I talked about, where institutions make transfers between state accounts, and you have to do that before May 1st. There were a couple instances, and in fact, to be specific, 2 instances where those didn't show up on the reports that we brought to the board. So three recommendations out of that section. Ensure student fee reporting includes relevant detail and compliance with policy intent. Number 2, ensure accuracy, completeness, and consistency of system-wide reporting. And number 3, and this one was kind of very specific to our student fee report, revise student fee reporting templates and instructions, which we just did that actually. So I'm not sure the timing of some of this may have already been fixed because we've already modified that report. So moving on to page, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to page 28, and I'm going to talk about the reserves. So in this section, this is a section that begins reserves not adequately managed. And what the auditors found here is that some of our institutions had policies. None of the institutions had policies on specific targets, but essentially what the auditors found is that we don't have system level policies when it comes to reserves. And when you establish, and what they're looking for is they're looking for specific targets depending on the fund, right? Because a capital fund, you're going to maintain reserves at a different level than you would for parking, for example. That we didn't have system level targets, and that we didn't have policies on how funds should be used, or what approval processes there should be to utilize that. They also talked about contingencies, which are different than reserves. To me, a reserve is sort of there for operating purposes. A contingency is set aside for, I think of it almost like a rainy day fund. We have an account, in fact, in system admin that's required under the code to maintain a contingency. And that's really something that we only utilize when we have a shortfall in revenue and other things. So the auditors pointed out that we needed some policies to define sort of those targets, how we can use funds from reserves, what level of reserves are appropriate. And then they talked about the contingency reserves. And one recommendation, again, out of this section, which was to develop target balances and an appropriate funding sources and uses that I just talked about, and define the difference between contingencies and reserves. So moving on to page 30. some sources and uses of reserves may not be appropriate. And this is a case where they found that some institutions had actually posted expenditures directly to reserves, which in my experience is unusual because typically if you have money in reserves, you will move budget authority into a spending category, not just spend it out of reserve. So that one was unusual. And the recommendation there is really the monitoring of reserves and contingency accounts. The next section begins on page 31. Student fees not utilized timely, and this sort of relates back to the student fee balance report. That board reports don't provide sufficient detail to see program level reserves, and so thus you have some programs that end up with reserves not being utilized per the board policy. And so their recommendation there is to evaluate high balance accounts and determine whether fees should be reduced or funds redirected. And then the last section that I was going to highlight in this audit is on page 33. And again, this is talking about fees in other areas other than student fee accounts. Board policy, and the heading there is board policy needed to ensure other funds are used timely. And basically the auditors had identified several self-supporting programs that retained high balances for a number of years. And the recommendation there's two defined self-supporting programs because there is no definition, at least in our handbook or procedures and guidelines that define self-supporting. So that's recommendation 1 out of that section. Recommendation 2 was monitor and report on non-student fee funded programs with high balances, which we currently don't. Report on those. So, Mr. Chair, that's the first audit. I thought it might make sense to sort of do them, each audit and sort of answer questions and then move on to the next one. So that's the first audit. I don't know if there are specific questions on that one.
Thank you. And it makes sense to break it down like that. There's a lot of information in here. And so we'll start with questions from the Regents. Regent Boylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wow, that came faster than I thought. Okay. I had a question about this, and I knew these audit things were coming, and I was asking questions about, the real estate funds, etc. And we've talked about that. So when you mention this high-tech word, nexus in those expenditures, what the fudge is that? To me, that's scary. Nexus.
Thank you. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer. Essentially what I'm talking about is, and maybe another word is sort of related, right? Similar, maybe similar is the best word. So in other words, in the state operating budget, we spend a lot of those state dollars on delivering instruction. So if you have a self-supporting account where you are also spending funding on instruction, the ability to sort of move those funds between self-supporting and state would make sense. What the auditors pointed out, at least where there were cases that, again, in their opinion, we were moving expenditures that weren't similar, but we were just doing it so we didn't revert state funding.
Thank you. One more question, sir. More questions, but so that means, and help me with this, we can move funds to help faculty and students to give them, help them with their expenses or something, or not charge them more fees, because we can say, hey, there's money, millions of dollars lying around in one fund, like land sales, and then we can transfer it to any other college or university to help their students. Is that, like I always say, I'm a simple man, so I'm trying to get simple answers. So we can do something like that?
Yeah, for the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, we can move money around, and we do that. And again, what the auditors were specifically looking at is our movement between self-supporting and state, but we also have the ability to move it around. But again, it depends on where you're moving it from, because, and the auditors didn't get into this and they didn't look at this. But if you're charging students for parking and you have reserves in the parking fund, let's say, the question for the board from a policy standpoint, and really for the students, is it then appropriate to take what they paid in parking fees and use it, for example, for scholarships? Because if I'm a student and I'm paying parking fees, I'm not sure I want to pay an extra parking fee so you can use it for scholars, or the institutions can use it for scholarships. So when I've talked about self-supporting accounts and the restricted nature of them, that's what I'm talking about. That if a student pays a specific fee for a specific purpose, in my opinion, at least, it should stay in that specific purpose, and you shouldn't be moving it around for other things. Some of the fees that we're talking about here are more fungible than that, I guess. So they're more flexible, maybe. So it depends on the fee. So the answer is it depends on which one you're talking about.
All right, good, thank you. One last question before I make this statement. When you say system-wide monitoring, why don't we have that? Why don't we have a system? NSHE's been around for 1,000 years nearly. And this board has been useless in a bunch of things. And this is one of them. Not this board, not these people, we weren't there. Why don't we have a system-wide monitoring? That's kind of scary. And I know what you said about student fees. I wouldn't like, and I've been a student for too long, but I wouldn't like my fees. I'm talking about land sales. That one really gets to my, that place I won't mention, but it really gets to me, what happens with all that money? So this system-wide monitoring, how do we go about enforcing that? Do we as a board vote on it? What do we do? You help us because you are the expert on these kind of things. Why don't we have a system-wide? That's scary.
So for the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, and I think there are several answers to that question. And part of it comes down to resources. So if you're talking about my office, I essentially have 7 or 8 people, and they have very specific jobs to do. And we just don't, at least in my office, we don't have the resources to oversee what the institutions are doing, right? So at the system level. The other piece to it is internal audit, obviously. An internal audit, and for those of you that have been on the audit committee in the past, you know this. I mean, Joe will bring, Mr. Sunbury will bring to the audit committee an audit plan for the year, and they have very specific audits that they can do that have their own scope and their own determination of how many resources. And so what I will say about these audits, because if the question is, why weren't these things caught by either the auditors or by my office? The answer is because the legislative auditors had a very specific scope in each one of these. So they came in this case, to look at self-supporting accounts and reserves. I'm not sure that internal audit, for example, has ever done an audit like that at NSHE. They do other audits, but if they came in with that same scope, I would be willing to bet my next paycheck that Joe and his team would find the same issues. So I think the answer is it's just resources. I think the third part of it to me is the reporting. So they talk about the reporting and the inaccuracies in the reports, and we have we have an enterprise-wide financial system. And what we don't do well in that enterprise-wide financial system is we don't have good consistency on how we use it across the system. So we have a consolidated system, but if you're one institution, you may be accounting for the general improvement fee slightly different than a different institution. So what we need, and we've been working on this, myself and the other business officers, is we need to have consistency, because in some of these cases where the auditors are saying your reports aren't consistent, what we do currently is we send out report templates to the institutions and they provide that information back to us. What I would like to be able to get to is that we at the system level can pull a report across the system. The problem with doing that now is, as I talked about, there are inconsistencies in the data currently between campuses. So in a lot of cases, it's impossible to do that. So one of the fixes to some of this is on the reporting side, and that will help us. That's a way that we can help the monitoring without requiring at least additional resources in the long run. We might need some resources in the short run so that we can make sure we have that consistency. But if we are able to pull reports at a system level, that identifies some of the areas that the auditors highlighted, that will help. That will certainly help. So
Thank you,
hopefully,
Mr. Klinger. Thank you so much.
Are there any other questions from Regents regarding that first part of the briefing? I've got
The last one. quick
okay,
question, I
sure, Regent
apologize.
Breger.
Mr. Klinger, so your outside auditors, do they present to the audit committee so that they have that presentation before we come to this meeting?
yeah, for the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger. So for our annual financial statements, the auditors typically in December,
Mhm.
they're currently Grant Thornton, they come to the audit committee and they present both our what used to be called the single audit and the financial statements. And so they come and they do a presentation on that. And of course, they have a write-up in there as well, and they usually have findings that they present as well. Usually, a lot of the times those findings are around just some of the internal control stuff. But yes, they do present the audit on the financial statements.
So they have a significant and insignificant. Some are things that are extremely fixable and others that just have never come up in the past. And once they come up, you correct that and the next audit shows that those corrections have been made.
That's correct.
Okay, that's what I'm familiar with and comfortable
That's
with.
correct.
Thank you.
I've got, go ahead, Regent Crawford.
Regent Cruz Crawford for the record. So I'm looking at the 13 recommendations, and a lot of them really lay with the board with creating those policies and oversight. How do we develop those? Like, what's the next step as the motion? Chair.
That's a great question. And I think this leads us to something very positive that's come out of this finding, is that we have to have an assessment of policy, and we're going to have to re-examine current policy and improve that policy. And so I think there's some great opportunity here to be able to do that. And that is part of the next step.
And for the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, to Cruz Crawford, to your question, and maybe just this is a good time to highlight this. So what the audit requires is, and so we had the initial presentation or the initial presentation of the audit last week. So the next step in the process is a 60-day report that is due April 10th. And then the final report is what they call a 6-month report, which is due October 10th. And so we will be bringing back to the Regents at the March meeting that initial 60-day plan. Now, that initial 60-day plan doesn't have all the policy recommendations in it. It really sort of outlines for the auditors, if we have policies that we've already modified, here are those policies, but here are the steps that we're going to take to sort of get there. The other piece that I will say is that in conversations with the chancellor, he is putting together some committees, or what I call working groups, that will then make recommendations on these policies that will then bring to the board. So the board is definitely going to be involved in this process.
Thank you. You know what? I've got a couple of questions on in board pack on page 25, and I think you alluded to this earlier, but I'm going to ask that maybe you expand it. There's reference to information that should have been reported to the board that wasn't. It's on the bottom where it says some transactions not reported to the board. Why didn't internal audit or your office identify some of these transactions and then report them back to the board?
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, and that's a great question, and it goes back to I think my answer to Regent Boylan's question. And so this is if you're looking at page 25, what they're specifically talking to there is that May 1st report that I talk about. And so this is a report that we bring to BFF. And again, like all of our other reports currently, we send out a request to the institutions and we say to them, tell us all the transactions that you have that meet the criteria, and we combine them together in my office and then we submit them to the board. So I guess the short answer to your question is we currently don't have the resources or the ability to just run these reports at the system level. We rely on the institutions. And I think, in fact, in that statement, I think there's a statement that says institutions are solely responsible for reporting complete and accurate information. So the short answer is we have to rely on the institutions to provide that information. And if they don't, we really don't have a mechanism to go find it otherwise.
So I appreciate that. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. Since internal audit was mentioned, I just felt I should chime in. But I think to CFO Klinger's original point, we put together an audit plan. And so if that's something, that is something that we can absolutely put on future audit plans, right? I mean, we can set aside a bucket of time to provide some, what I'd call independent validation of some of those numbers, right? I mean, we do rely heavily on our institutions to give that information, but that spot check is certainly a good value add that we can bring. And that's something we can do going forward, and certainly would be happy if the audit committee chair allows. I'll bring that on the March audit plan. Thanks.
Thank you. And that makes sense. And I'm sure there's a lot of things that we're going to be able to take a look at and implement as we move forward. But what it very clearly sounds like, Andrew, is that your reporting to the board is only as good as the reporting from the institutions to you and Joseph Sunbury. And if there is a lack of information regarding anything that would have to do with the financial aspect of data that you're requesting or want to take a look at, if you don't have that, then certainly you can't provide the board the information that we may want, or at least have that be an accurate part of reporting to the board. And then the board can only make those decisions based on what we're doing off of the information that you're providing to us. And so it's this domino effect then that certainly takes place where you're not receiving all the information that you want to receive, or some of that information might not be correct. And you're relying on the information from the institutions to be correct and to be transparent. And then that would provide this expectation of you receiving that information, having it, and then being able to deliver it to the board. And then the board feeling very confident that if we're acting upon something, it's because of best interest of what board members would have to do to be able to support our institutions. But again, it's only as good as the information that you're receiving. I do have another question, because so it's in board packets. I think it's Exhibit 7. It's on page 32. Where the audit shows programs with highest ending balance of student fees. And student fees is always something that we have usually very lengthy conversations about. And every year we receive a report listing the institution fee balances to ensure that the student fees benefit the students who pay them. Why were these programs with high balances not reported to the board as part of that report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer. And I think the answer is what you just stated. We can only present to the information we present to the board is only as good as the information we get from the institutions. And so this is a case where these are what the auditors identified here is specific programs underneath that student fee balance report, because we do have a student fee balance report, and that report again is intended to make sure we are in compliance with the board's policy that institutions are not holding student fee reserves. The problem with the report that the auditors found is that because it's rolled up underneath there, you have individual programs that can exceed that. So this goes back, I think, partly to my answer to Regent Boylan, What I would like to have the ability to do, and we're just not there yet, is to be able to pull that information at a system level out of our financial system, and we can look at it on a program level. So if we had a report where we could run that says, show me student fee balances and show it to me by program, if we had the ability to run that report, that doesn't take a lot of resources to do sort of that validation or monitoring that the auditors are talking about. But as I stand here today, we don't have the ability to do that on a system-wide basis. So again, we're relying on that information coming to us from the institutions. And the report, in fairness to the institutions, the report we're asking for it at a high level. We're not asking them for the details. So perhaps part of the policy needs to have them do a review of those programs and report any that exist, because there isn't a policy that says that now. Essentially what there is a policy that says that, but there's not a self-monitoring aspect of it. So I think there's multiple answers to help fix some of this stuff.
Okay, and during your brief back to us, you talked about some reporting modifications have already taken place. Although I would offer that there are a lot of recommendations that we've been provided. Of the recommendations that have been provided, are you in agreement with the recommendations that are being suggested so that we can move this in a better manner than what we're looking at now?
No, for the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, I mean, I think the great thing about having the legislative auditors look at the specific areas that they did is they have found weaknesses in our policies and in our procedures in some case. And while it may be uncomfortable, it's not a bad thing because it allows us the opportunity to correct those and provide better reports to the board and provide better information to the board. So I am in agreement with all of the recommendations. Now, there's some things in there as they talk about the findings and the conclusions they came to that maybe I don't disagree with, but the recommendations themselves, absolutely, I agree with it. And I think that is the benefit of the audits.
Thank you. And then just one other question. It's been identified that institutions were using general improvement funds or restricted fees to support athletics, to support band. What might be helpful for the board so that as we're gathering this information in preparing, particularly in March, to be able to ask our presidents and those business officers questions about their reporting process to you and Joseph Sunbury. Almost a breakdown, I think, right? So what I'm suggesting is, after this, I would not be surprised if a regent says, Andrew, can you please provide me with something a lot more specific about how money is being moved at an institution or where money is being placed, particularly if the intent of those funds weren't necessarily to be used for something very specific like athletics or band. And that's not really a question as much as I'm offering. There's the potential for this to take place.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer. And what I will say, I mean, since you use the general improvement fee finding as an example, what I will point out is, and I read you the definition of the general improvement fee and how you may use it, is there's a difference of interpretation of the current policy, right? So the auditors looked at it and they interpreted it one way. The institutions have interpreted it another way. It doesn't mean either one is wrong. It just means because it is vague, as the auditor said, it is subject to interpretation. So in fairness to both parties, what they are recommending, the auditors, is that we clarify, in that case, that specific fee, clarify what is the intent of how it can be used? Because I think that's the challenge with that one specifically.
Thank you. I appreciate your answers and your time. We have a question from Regent Boylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two things. I think as a board, it is our fiduciary duty to ask uncomfortable and difficult questions, which unfortunately a lot of people don't do. But I'm getting so used to it that I will ask them. And firstly, I was suggesting that when are we going to do this and ask for all these difficult which I've already started asking you about the money from the sales. Where is it going? Blah, 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 all that good stuff. And why don't we have all these things? But just to make it on a lighter tone, sorry, excuse me, you said BFF. And I know that nowadays the Wians, they say best friends forever. So what is BFF? I'm a wee bit lost here.
Sorry, for the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger. And I didn't even know I said that because I try not to do that because those listening may not know what I'm talking about. The Business Finance and Facilities Committee, BFF.
Awesome.
Sorry.
And we have, yeah, okay, thank you. And I'm used to acronyms with different organizations, but we have a finance committee kind of thing that is scary. They should be asking all these questions. The other thing is, why can't we, as an NSHE, not just UNLV or UNR or something, have those questions and make it simple? Because you said it shouldn't take too long and it isn't too difficult to ask all these questions and get the answers. So I'm blaming the board, not you. Don't get me wrong, because you know much more than I do. Why and how can we help you before the March meeting to say, hey, these are the things that could you please look at? And if you could find these audits, I'd mentioned to some of us that the legislature is doing these audits and they're really questioning us. So we need to be more proactive is what I'm trying to get at. And how and why haven't we done that is gone, but how can we do it in the future? Does it go to the finance committee? Should we ask them to bring these things to you or?
I think for the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer, I'm not following exactly, I think what your question is, but
Oh, neither am I, but yeah, I'm
Okay.
trying to ask, how can we do this so we can get moving on this and not end up where we need to, CYA and say, oh, we didn't do this, we didn't. So would that be the finance committee? Do we need some more oomph in that committee?
It could be, and I think that's it's really up to the board to decide,
Yeah.
Where do you want? So again, I think the next step is that 60-day report, and it's really up to the chair and the rest of the board. Where do you want that to go? Do you want that to go to the audit committee? Do you want that to go to the Business Finance and Facilities Committee? Do you want it to come to the entire board? So I think that if maybe that's the question you're asking, I think that's a decision the chair and the rest of the board can make. As far as, and I guess I'll say this, and I don't know that this may not be your question, but as you're going through the audits and as you're thinking about it and as you have follow-ups, if there's specific questions that you have, please reach out to me, reach out to Joe. I am always happy to, sit down with Regents and go through it and try and answer your questions. So I guess I would say that in between the meetings.
Yes, you are always, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Regent Perkins, do you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I guess, to throw it out there, in response to Regent Boylan, we can all of us, all 13 of us can go to any of the meetings at any time. That's the beauty of us having the meetings, separate. So it's up to us, it's incumbent on us to ask those questions when we come to the Business and Finance Committee, to ask for just a small group of individuals to be responsible for asking and seeing every question. That's why we have 13 eyes, so each person can come to that committee and ask those questions.
26.
Good one. Yes, you're right.
I'm good with numbers.
Joseph Sunbury.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. To, I guess, piggyback off of what CFO Klinger was saying to Regent Boylan's question, I do think the responses that will be provided for the April 10th 60-day follow-up will be helpful, because that will be sort of the next step in this iterative process for those policy enhancements. And quite honestly, I'm appreciative of those potential enhancements, because that does make internal, when a policy is very explicit, it makes it a lot easier to audit. And so I think that will help then the monitoring going forward as well. So I do think, one of the differences between a deliverable like this in the deliverable, like what you see in our internal audit reports is, we will have management's responses embedded in our reports. So you kind of get the full picture. This type of report, it's different, not right or wrong, just different. And so you've seen what the auditors have observed, and now 60 days later, you'll get the opportunity to sort of see what the institutions and NSHE as a whole will be, kind of get not their side of the story, but that's part of it, right? They'll be able to add some additional context, which I think will be helpful. We'll get a little more information. And so this is step one of many. So thank you.
Thank you, Joseph Sunbury. Regent Carvalho, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to respond to the conversation regarding where this lands. I've had conversations with Mr. Klinger about if the board feels that business, finance, and facilities can take this up. As the chair of that committee, I'm more than happy to do that. I think that this has been an exercise in seeing greater transparency and accountability for the board and for this committee. And unfortunately, we can't oversee what we haven't seen. And so this audit has helped to identify some deficiencies that we've had in BFF and the board in general. And I appreciate Regent Perkins' remarks regarding that. Any regent can attend any meeting, and if there are any questions about the reporting, as we have done in the past, we can improve reporting and improve that transparency to the board. This will help us to clarify that even more. And as the chair of that committee, I am in full support and agreement with what we can do to move forward to make sure that each one of us has the information that we need going forward. I would just also say that I have mentioned to Mr. Klinger as well that I've heard you say that you're concerned about where real estate transaction proceeds are going. I would just like to offer that I would caution using those proceeds for things like payroll. I don't think it's an appropriate use of those. But I have discussed with Mr. Klinger that we should ask our institutions when they do intend to go forward with real estate transactions to provide us that information where proceeds are intended to go within our funding structure. So I appreciate that. And I would also say,
Regent Carvalho, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have to take an administrative pause because SES is having a streaming problem, and I'd like everything to kind of move the way that it's supposed to move. So we're gonna take a break until 10:10 for this administrative and IT support problem that we have. And when you finish with your comments, Regent Carvalho, I know Regent McMichael's got some questions as well. So let's take 10 minutes, or at least come back at 10:10. Thank you. Okay, we're going to resume where we were prior to the administrative break to support IT. Regent Carvalho, I know that you were in the middle of a conversation. Are there other points? I want to make sure that you're able to articulate everything that you wanted to be able to do prior to us taking a break.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not exactly sure where the communication left off. I'll just reserve the rest of my comments for when we've finished all three audits. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Regent Carvalho.
And I'll do this very quickly. Susan Brager for the record. What I'd like to say is, and I'm going to do my best to not go back to too many past experiences, but what's good about this audit is everything, quite frankly. And what it's going to do is then it gives the chief financial officer and the chief internal auditor, they now take this next year along with us for any policy changes would be us. For them is to correct anything. But in me looking at it, I didn't see one real significant. So it's nothing to be alarmed about. It's actually an amazing audit. When I looked at it when we received our information to what I've seen in the past. And so I think it's real important to not focus on too much until they're able to come back and say, we've done this, this, and this. But it was overall, it was amazing when you have, between 8 and 12 people that come to audit something, they're going to find something, but a lot of it was more policy that I looked at than anything else. And then we do have Regent Carvello that being on the committee she's at, she's able to refine what she does and those that work there to come back to us and say, it's in a year, if they still haven't corrected it, that's when we as a board would want to say, hey, what are you doing? But overall, it was fantastic.
Thank you, Regent Breger. Regent McMichael?
Yes, my question is, out of the 13 recommendations so far, has any of them been dealt with? And if so, could you elaborate on any?
For the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, we have not specifically, and you can see this in board pack on page 57 and 58. We have accepted all of the recommendations from the auditors, but at this point, we have not implemented any policy changes or procedural changes yet to implement their recommendations. But we will.
Regent Crawford, you have a question?
Regent Cruz Crawford for the record. I just wanted to share with our board and our constituents that in the Board of Regents handbook, we do have our financial policies on Title IV, Chapter 9, page 10 and 11. And some of those do discuss the budget revisions and transfers. If there are institutions that are in violation of any of these existing policy, is there any type of recourse, meaning specifically as a parent of a student that is in an NSHE institution and I pay some of these student fees, is there any way that, you know, the students can apply for reimbursement or discount toward their existing student fees?
Mr. Chairman, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, I think, you know, the answer is it's up to this board. You know, there is a recommendation in the first audit that, for example, that we evaluate some of those programs with the high ending fee balances and determine, I think to your point or to your question maybe, you know, do you lower the fees? Do you redistribute those fees? I mean, what do you do with those fees? So I think that evaluation process needs to happen as we look at some of those specific programs and make a determination. And ultimately, it's up to the board.
I think we're wrapped up on the first part question. So if you want to get into capital construction projects, feel free to do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer, and I know that first one took some time. These will all get faster as we go because I have less to talk about. So I'm going to shift, and this is the second attachment in board pack. It is the capital construction projects audit, and I'll just for the record, I want to just read the scope. So the scope of the audit included a review of capital construction projects that were solicited, in progress, or completed between fiscal years 2019 and 21. The objective was to determine if UNLV and UNR managed capital construction projects in accordance with laws, policies, and appropriate management standards. And the audit made 18 recommendations. And so unlike the first audit, where the auditors looked at all institutions, this one was specifically just focused on the two universities. So I'm going to start on trying to sync up my notes here with what's in board pack. So I'm going to start on page 12 of that second supplemental attachment and just go through the recommendations here. So the first area that the auditors looked at was state appropriated operating funds being used for capital construction. So the state appropriations, we do receive state appropriations occasionally for capital purposes, but what the auditors are talking about here is cases where state appropriations were made into what we call the state operating budgets for operating purposes and then were used for capital construction. And the auditors pointed out that the board policy, which states that funding from the state must be used to the greatest extent possible in support of student-based credit instruction, and that we do have a separate process for capital projects, and that if you're using state funds for capital, you may not be using it for intended purposes. And so the recommendation that came out of this, again, similar to the others, was to clarify state appropriated funds are not to be used for capital construction and develop controls to ensure compliance. Moving on. So now moving on to page 16, and it's the section that's titled Solicitation and Management of State-Funded Projects Did Not Comply with Law and Policy. And what the auditors found here was essentially what's required, and this is under actually state law, projects that have more than 25% state funding are required to utilize the management services, the project management services of the State Public Works Division. And if I remember correctly, I think they found 2 cases where that didn't happen. And so the recommendation there is to develop procedures to ensure the involvement of State Public Works where required, and and the second one was ensure compliance with state law regarding state public works. Next section is on page 18 in board pack, project costs exceeding funding, and the auditors found some capital projects accounts that the project had closed out, but the project account had a deficit balance. So essentially, in those cases, they had overspent essentially the original budget for that project. And the recommendation here is to monitor construction accounts, identifying potential shortfalls, and ensuring project scopes and modifications are appropriate considering the realized funding available. Now I'm going to move on to page 22 under the heading Change Order Review Not Adequate. And some of the rest of these are pretty straightforward. So I'm going to sort of breeze through some of these as far as the recommendations. So change order review, they pointed out cases where there was a lack of supporting documentation, unallowed costs, that lease purchase agreements lacked controls for change orders, and that change order terms were not always followed, and the change order process in some cases did not follow NSHE policy. So the recommendations here: develop standardized construction contracts that define allowable overhead and profit markup fees, implement proper controls to ensure institution personnel stay consistent with contract terms, develop policies and procedures to review change order costs thoroughly. So again, moving on to page 27, under the heading Scope Modifications Increased Project Costs. And in this one, this is where the auditors had pointed out in the audit, at least that they felt there was inadequate planning in some cases, as well as scope modifications that increased the cost. And so their recommendations here are develop system-wide policies to ensure appropriate project users participate in planning to limit changes, and then develop system-wide policies to ensure all project costs are identified and included in the project. Moving on to page 30, project closeout process can be strengthened is the heading. And they found cases where the labor commissioner was not notified at project completion, final payment issued without critical project closeout documentation, and project ending balances not reverted timely after the project had closed out. Recommendations, develop a procedure to ensure institutions comply with state law and notify the labor commissioner. Ensure project closeout documentation is obtained before the final contract payment. And lastly, require institutions to develop policies and procedures to monitor project balances to ensure that unused funds are reverted timely. So I believe this is the last section on page 34. And this is where the page 34 through the rest of the audit is really talking about system-wide guidance needed for construction procurement. And the first heading there is non-traditional procurement methods warrant additional review. And they talk about public-private partnerships, lease purchase agreements, and other projects. And their recommendation there is to seek clarification on authority to enter into P3s for construction projects and develop system-wide policies and procedures for the use of P3s. And I know this is something in conversations I've had with Chief General Counsel Jimmy Martinez, as well as Mr. Wixom, that I think the opinion of at least those two attorneys is that we do have the authority to do this. And I think what the auditors were looking for was a specific reference in state law that said, you know, NSHE, you can do X, Y, and Z. And while we don't have that, the interpretation, at least in my conversations with the attorneys, has been their belief is that under the existing law, we do have the authority to enter into these types of agreements. So I think, yes, so there's, the final was, sorry, Mr. Chairman, page 37, noncompliance regarding project solicitation. CMAR projects, the auditors pointed out that CMAR projects did not advertise the weights for evaluation criteria as required under NRS. And one design project did not actually have an executed agreement. And so again, policy recommendations there, develop policies and procedures to ensure capital project solicitations comply with the law and adhere to NSHE policies and procedures. Ensure project solicitations include a defined procurement schedule and monitoring to ensure contracts are awarded timely. And finally, clarify the use of written agreements with appropriate terms that they are required for design projects. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that's it for the capital audit on my sort of highlights and notes.
Thank you. We appreciate your time. Are there any regions that have questions regarding capital construction and specific to capital construction? Region Downs has a question?
Yes. So I may have missed it on here, but just a couple of questions. When there is a shortfall, we spend more money than we had allocated for a project for whatever reason. Does that come out of the reserves for the institution, or is there some other funding for that? And when there is a surplus, where does that money go?
Thank you. For the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger. And the shorter answer is when there's a deficit, and I think they did note at least in one case, where the institution had reserves and other self-funded accounts that they used ultimately to cover the deficit. So I think it was one where they were waiting on some donor funds, but they had used some self-supporting funds, if I remember correctly. So I think the first part of your question is where do they get the funding? They essentially have to find it from other self-supporting accounts, whether it's investment income or others. And what was the second part of your question? Sorry.
When there's surplus funds, there's a situation with this and surplus funds, where do those go?
So if there are surplus funds, it depends on where the funds came from. So if they are state-funded projects and there are state funds in the projects, the state always expects their money to be spent last and reverted first, maybe is the best way to put it. And so if there's any money left in a project and it had state funding in it, that money has to go back to the state.
Thank you. And still Regent Downs for the record. Back to the previous question about the deficit. So you say they have to find the money from other self-supporting fund locations. Would that be, for example, the different fees, if there are surpluses from student fees, for example, in a parking fees, and so they need money to cover the cost of a new lab, then they would pull it from there?
For the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, more than likely, if it's a capital project, the first obvious source of other funds would be the capital improvement fees. Depending on if an institution has specific capital improvement fees that they can use. But yes, it would be, they would have to find other sources. In this case and in the audit, what the auditors found is that the examples that I guess that they found that they put in the audit was that there were capital accounts that they didn't close out, they just left them in a deficit balance. So they didn't transfer reserves from other areas to close out those accounts. They just left those accounts in a deficit balance for a period of time. And what the auditors are, and specifically in that recommendation, are noting is that you need to close those accounts out. And the institutions can do that because they have other accounts that have positive balances. So even though you may have a deficit in that project account, you have other accounts that have positive balances that more than make up for it. But, based on the auditor's recommendation, you should not leave those accounts, I guess, in deficit, maybe to drill down on that one a little more specific.
And if I can ask another question, Regent Downs for the record. What do they do, an audit or an analysis of why there was a shortage? Why the project cost more? Was it just inflated cost due to inflation? Or is it that the company bid low, but they bid unrealistically low?
Yeah, and for the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer, according to the audit, at least, I think there are maybe two reasons, according to the auditors, why this happened. One was what they felt, at least, that was there was not adequate planning done ahead of time. And they specifically referenced lack of involvement from particular departments or whatever that were going to use the facility. And so their recommendation is, well, there was inadequate planning, thus that's why the cost went over. And then in some other cases, they pointed to change orders and scope modifications. So expanding the original scope of the project from what the original budget was. And again, that's why they have the recommendation in there that scope modifications need to consider the budget essentially and the funding available for the project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Regent Carvalho has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to mention regarding P3s, I was surprised to see this finding in this audit, and I look forward to working with Mr. Wixom to get further clarification on exactly where any questions have been regarding the legality of them. I think that they're an important part of moving forward with our system and providing the needed facilities that each of our institutions has. The medical school at UNLV was a wonderful example of donor funds being used to their maximum extent to provide for the greatest good for our community. So I'd like to commend those donors that were involved with UNLV. And we have other projects that are in the pipeline regarding in terms of P3s. And I think that, like I said, they're very important. And I hope that we can get any kind of clarification that we need on those quickly so that we can move forward with those. Thank you.
Regent Breger has a question for you.
So when you mentioned, Susan Breger for the record, when you mentioned the change order, if it's a certain percentage, they have to come back to someone since this board's not involved in that. if it's over 3 or 5% or whatever that number might be.
Yeah, for the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, and they did in fact point out, because yes, there is a policy, and if it's greater than 10%, it does require the chancellor's signature, and there were a couple instances in the report where that did not happen, that it did not go back to the chancellor for approval.
And that would create the documentation problem and the overage, because once that change order happens, it has to be determined whether it was the contractor that didn't bid correctly, or whether there was just something as they opened up a door, or, you know, a problem that it would occur. So 10% is that based on whatever the amount is? That's pretty high, 10%.
Yeah, I don't think there's a.
There's no differential if it's
yeah.
a smaller project
Yeah.
or larger. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions regarding capital construction? I don't think we have any other questions regarding construction. Andrew, if you want to move into institutional foundations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer. On this one will be really quick. So the audit objective was to determine if privately donated money was appropriately recorded and spent in accordance with donors' intended purposes. And this audit had 3 recommendations, and I'm just going to talk about the recommendations. The first recommendation was to ensure that the foundations have adequate policies and related practices governing the issuance of retention of acknowledgement letters or receipts for donor gifts. There were, I think, just a couple that did not have that. And then number 2 was encourage the institution foundation boards, where applicable, to verify key control processes are occurring, including reconciliation of donor management systems to financial software and retention of adequate supporting documentation. And then the last one is develop a policy requiring institutions to routinely review inactive gift accounts and identify opportunities to repurpose funds to actively utilized accounts when appropriate. They found a couple instances where there were some donor accounts that had not been active in a number of years. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. There's a few questions. Regent Arascata has a question for you.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. CFO Cleaner, the majority of these seem, the 3 reports that we just provided, all very sound, but under self-supporting report, materially, it sounded sound. There's some good suggestions that are reasonable, but the summary of the report itself it makes the entire report look horrible. It seems that the summary was written in a way to make it publishable, to make it sound almost like a gotcha, to make it look like the NSHE and the Regents have participated into something, probably something egregious, in which I don't feel that this has. As auditors, would this summary be considered innocuous or something not as detrimental as what the summary is saying?
For the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, and I guess the first thing I'll say is I am not an auditor, so I'm not sure I am qualified to maybe answer what you're looking for there. And I guess maybe what I'll say just in general, and maybe I'm repeating myself, but again, I think this is, the auditors have highlighted areas where, policies either don't exist or are vague. As we talked about the general improvement fee, the policy is vague, and so it's subject to interpretation. And so the auditors are writing this up sort of with the facts as they see them and based on their interpretation. But I do think, and I guess maybe the short answer is, I think there are lots of opportunities for improvement. Do I think the institutions were doing things intentionally to skirt the law? No, I do not think they were doing things intentionally to skirt the law. If you're setting up a cost allocation account to allocate your police services costs and you're putting general fund in it, I guess technically, to the letter of the law, should you have reverted that? But I could also make an argument
well, it's a cost allocation count, so do we, and I did make this argument, auditors disagreed, that it shouldn't revert. So I think a lot of it is, again, it's subject to interpretation. And at the end of the day, you know, the auditors get to decide what that interpretation is, and we live with it.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks, Vice Chair Arascata. Just to piggyback off of what CFO Klinger has said, you know, as an auditor, you know, if you put 10 auditors in a room, they're probably all going to have slightly different judgments on any given area. You know, foundations specifically is one where, you know, my team has looked and kind of spot checked foundations before in similar areas. So when I saw the results specifically of this particular audit, and I just pulled out the expenditures testing as an example, and you see, you know, 686 out of 690 were appropriate. You know, that my first thought was that sounds about right to me. That's consistent with what, you know, my team saw with a much smaller scope. You know, for some of the audits, the foundations that we looked at. So, and then similarly to what CFO Klinger said, you know, I think these policy enhancements, that's going to make future audits smoother. So we're appreciative of that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Regent Del Carlo has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a question, but I do have a comment on all three of the audits. And as a former internal control person in a very, very large corporation, you do an audit with the purpose of improvement. And I thought, I looked at this audit as really a gift from the state that they would do this. I mean, they spent 18 months with 8 auditors. So that in itself is an investment of way over $1 million. And if we had tried to do anything on that scope within NSHE, I mean, we don't have that kind of resource, as CFO Klinger pointed out. So I thought the audit was really good. I think we have a lot to be proud of. There was no fraud found. There was no misappropriation of funds. There was no willful misconduct pointed out in anything. And what we have, there's some human errors. That's the whole purpose of an audit, to go and to find things that need improvement. I see this as continuous improvement. I'm looking forward to having our board policy revised, changed, modified, whatever is required. And I do agree with what Chief Internal Auditor Sunbury just said. This will make his job easier, because all the changes that will get made to policy then will go back to Mr. Sunbury and his group. So I see the whole thing very positive. I think it's a great learning lesson for the board, and especially with 5 new regions coming in to put the highlight and look on the audit of this. And I just think we have a lot to be proud of, and I am a big believer in continuous improvement. So thank you to the state for providing this information. That's all.
Regent Borland, do you have a question or a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was actually laughing about what Regent Del Carlo just said. Thank you to the state. It's amazing stuff they've handed us. Let's run with it. And like Regent Heather Brown said earlier, we really need a lot of accountability, and this gives us a starting point. But my question was, when there's money put in, donated to let's say, I don't know, like Regent Carvalho said, the medical school, and then there's money left over from that. What happens to that money? And can that be thrown into a slush fund? That can just really, how will we be held accountable, or whoever is, or what happens to that money?
For the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, I think in the specific example in the capital audit where they were looking at the medical school, and again, the state, just like they do on what I would call a normal or traditional, maybe is the right word, a traditional CIP, where they're giving us state funding and then we're matching it with our own funding. They see their money as being spent last, reverted first. And that is true with the medical school funding as well. So the donors graciously put in all that money, but the state still, and they pointed it out in the audit, they still expect that if there is a dollar left, that it go back to them. And I think at this point in time, I don't think there is a final accounting of what the project cost is there. So it has not been reverted yet, but I don't know if that answers your question, but.
If I may follow up, no, not really. I meant, let's just say any entity gets money, donated to them. A gets money. And for certain reasons, then there's money left over from there. And we didn't match it with state funds or anything. There's just money left over. What happens to that money from project A or something? Does it go into a slush fund that NSHE can use, or that institution can use, or how does that work? Just because I heard this word again from her, Regent Brown, accountability. What happens to that money? Who's held accountable?
For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer, and the answer is it depends on the donor agreement. So it depends on the donor agreement where that money goes specifically, whether they are donating it for a specific project and then they want money back at the end. So it really just depends on those donor agreements.
Thank you. Thank you, Regent Boylan. I think that's a great question. And you're actually touching on what I think, and again, I love this audit stuff, but this is probably my favorite recommendation that was made out of all of them, right? And so one of the reasons why I liked it is I think when we did some of our foundation audits, I don't know that we thought about looking at it through that lens of, let's look and see how many years has it been since some of these, do we have gift funds just sitting around, right? And so I'm just going to read something directly from the LCB auditor's reports. So the Board of Regent policy requires donor notification if the foundation plans to delay for any reason the use of restricted gift funds for its intended purpose. And then under specific circumstances, institutions can repurpose unused gift funds as long as the money is used for similar purposes to the original donor's intent, or must request a change in use by the donor. And then lastly, they say some foundations have processes to consult with the Office of the Attorney General to go through legal means to make such changes. So that's where the recommendation comes in, right? NSHE could provide some additional guidance to the institutions, foundations to ensure these funds are used within an appropriate amount of time. So that's kind of an auditor's favorite answer is it depends. Yeah, but thank you.
Regent Brown, do you have a question?
Thank you. Regent Brown for the record. Yes, like Regent Boylan pointed out, I wrote accountability over the top of my paper. That's what I kept writing down when I was reading through the supplemental material. And but I think we've also identified, and to echo a couple of my colleagues, we have a real blessing here in this audit, and we've identified a couple things that we can do. Streamline data collection, creating reporting parameters, set reporting structures for the presidents, and that's something that has to come from us. So at the end of the day, the accountability lays with us 13 and our staff. The only thing I wanted to bring up is that I don't actually believe time is on our side. In 20 days, we enter a legislative session, and we are asking the legislature to restore our funds. And it's their audit that actually said, hey, we're not exactly thrilled with everything we see. And so I just want to challenge everyone involved in this process to keep that deadline in mind. And so we can be transparent and we can start the legislative session off on a strong foot, showing that we are making real strides to fixing the things that they've highlighted. And I know for me, I'm excited to be on the Budget, Facilities, and Finance Committee. And so if there's anything I can personally do, I would love to help move that along. So.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from Regents or Regent Goodman?
Thank you. I just wanted to echo the tone. Basically, I just wanted to say that there was no fraud, and the purpose of an audit is to take these recommendations, and it will make us better. If it's incumbent upon us now to make sure that we implement these policies to make things better, and this is a gift. And I would have to just exactly echo what Regent Del Carlo said. This is definitely something it's a great document, and we'll move forward. So.
Regent Boylan, you have another question?
Just one last one. It struck me, and it's kind of scary. If the government, if the legislature considers that a gift to us, $1 million, let's say they took, can they possibly take that out of the funds that they intend to give us and say, hey guys, you know what? I already gave you $1 million, so give that back. Is that possible? Just no idea.
For the record, Chief Financial Officer Andrew Klinger, and I appreciate Regent Brown's comments because she's spot on. And that was frankly my fear going into the legislature is I don't want this audit to set the tone as we begin the legislative session in a couple of weeks. And our diligence in how we respond is going to be key in how that legislative session goes for us. So I appreciate the board having this meeting and having this discussion. So the short answer is yes. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew, because I believe that was why we're coming together today, to be able to address this and take action, to be able to demonstrate best practice measures as we move forward in terms of policy revamping and taking a look at it, anything that might be antiquated and quickly moving into an area where we can have better processes to support not only the system office, but our institutions. And I would offer that while we have some fantastic recommendations in terms of what we can do as a board, I have no doubt that you and Joseph Sunbury probably have some recommendations that you would like to bring to support better practices and procedures as we move forward. What I'd like to do is offer an opportunity, and thank you, Andrew, for your time, and thank you, Joseph, for your time as well. What I'd like to do is offer an opportunity for our acting chancellor to offer any comments that he has after hearing all the information that's been provided to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Dale Urquiaga, Acting Chancellor. Let me start by thanking the CFO Klinger and Chief Internal Auditor Sunbury for their presentation to you today, but also for working with me over these last weeks. And my thanks would then go to the folks you haven't seen in front of you, and those are the business officers at the institutions. So let me give you a little bit of background and process explanation. And as I do that, I want to thank this board for the tone I think one of you used that you have set. And I want to thank the chair for scheduling this meeting so that we could involve you in this process. I would echo the comments of the previous speakers. It is in our interest to be proactive in our response and to go to the legislature when we begin our first pre-session budget hearing a week from Friday. And then we go into every budget hearing subsequent to that post February 6th. So it is in our interest to talk about the proactive response. So I appreciate the chair and I appreciate the board's leaning into this. I don't know that I would ever call an audit a gift, but I do appreciate this work. As the board probably knows, I have run 3 cabinet agencies, this one included, in my career. So this is not my first legislative audit. And I, as the CEO of this board and of this system, this audit comes to me, all 3 of these. So I have to be the one to accept these recommendations. And as staff has told you, I did so. On Christmas Eve, the letter had to go back to the budget or to the auditor's staff at the LCB in order for it to be made public on January the 12th. Business officers provided some context. We asked for corrections 2 corrections at least were made to these audits, and then I accepted all 33 recommendations because I do believe that this is a roadmap for increased, I've heard the word accountability today. I would also suggest the word transparency is important for NSHE. We do not always have that reputation about our finances. And I think what these audits have called for is a level of increased transparency that is important. So let me sort of give you the way I bucket this work, and then I'll tell you the actual timeline going forward. So if I would summarize what the financial and auditing staff, who are much smarter than I, have said over the last 2 hours, there are a couple of buckets here. There is, as you've heard repeatedly, a bucket of need for policy change by this board. You, as the policy-making entity for this system, need to make some changes, some revisions to code on how documents are sent to you, what they contain, and what are the guardrails for things like reserve account balances. That's up to you. The audit suggests lots of ways that you can do that. So that's the first bucket. The second, Mr. Sunbury and Mr. Klinger have also talked to you about, and that is a need for monitoring and compliance, I would call it, at the system office. We have very small staffs. We rely on information that is sent to us, and then we give it to you. And so if there are hiccups along the way, or those documents are not what they ought be, someone here has to be able to find that. So I will signal to the board today. Those of you who've worked with me for the last 6 months know that I like to signal to you what's coming. When the NSHE budget is submitted to you for the new fiscal year, it will include new staff, and it will include staff about this function. We don't have a choice. It's very clear in this audit. We can have all the policy that we want. Someone has to monitor that, and we simply don't have the resources today, as the 2 experts have said to you. The third bucket are those items where legislative auditors have said this instance, this finding needs legislative attention, or perhaps butts up against the law in some way. That's not our policy, that's law. So the P3 partnerships is one example. Legislative intent on the transfer of money is another. I asked the legislative committee staff as I talked with them, like, if you think we need authority, then you have to help me get that. NSHE can't request bills. And so we will work with legislators and their staff if that becomes necessary. So that's how I would ask you to think about this work. There is the policy work, which is yours. There is the monitoring work, which would be subsequent chancellors and their staffs, and that will require budget action by this board. And then lastly are those finer points of legislative action, which I, as your representative, will be working with probably the money committees in the legislature to sort of fine tune. With that context, what happens next? Andrew has told you that our next iteration is a 60-day plan. So mark your calendars. The 60-day plan must be submitted to LCB on or before April the 10th. What that means is, as you have been told, we will come to the March board meeting with our preliminary recommendations for that plan. If you have questions, if you have suggestions, please send them either to myself or to the CFO. We will then be able to bring to you our outline for that plan. Mr. Chair, it's my understanding after listening to this conversation that you and I and the chair of internal audit and the chair of business finance facilities have some decisions to make as to what elevation that first draft of that plan goes to at the March meeting. So that's an expectation that I have to get us ready. So that's our first step, is drafting that 60-day plan. Again, I've taken a lot of notes from what individual regents have said today. We will be preparing the first draft of that. We'll bring it to the board and or its committees at the March meeting. In order to help us with that plan preparation and then the subsequent work that plan will call out, as the CFO has indicated, I will be appointing, pursuant to the Chancellor's authority under, I think it's Title IV, I think 3 committees, one for each audit. They are very distinct in their subject matter expertise. And yes, we will be reliant on the institutions. When the chancellor appoints a committee, just for the new regents, according to code, he or she must consult with the presidents. So we will talk with the presidents about who is necessary on those committees. But I would also represent to this board that as someone who's new, remember this whole audit occurred at a period when I was not chancellor. And I will be gone by the time these policies are in effect in a subsequent fiscal year. I would like to include at least one outside representative outside of NSHE on each of those committees. Whether that person comes from government or business or an audit firm, I think it's good for us to have some outside eyes. We are a very insular institution. We talk to ourselves a lot. And so as I appoint those committees, I will consult with the presidents, and I will also turn to the outside to build out what that looks like. Those committees then are charged with implementing the plan that you will look at in March and that we will submit to the legislature. So the next date is at a 6-month report is due on October the 10th of this year. So between March, April, when we put together our plan, and that date, we will be back to this board in June and September asking you to make policy change. And this is what I can represent to the legislature, that we are moving as fast as our processes call us to do. Some, as you know, and new regents may not know, some portions of the code require 2 hearings, an informational hearing before a vote can occur. So we'll move through that policy adoption. All of that will be done before this 6-month report is submitted. My goal is that that 6-month report be submitted and that it is simply approved by the Legislative Audit Subcommittee and a consent item, that we don't have another hearing, that we have done our job, we have been responsive. And so you will be called upon to cast votes on those policies as these committees make recommendations to my office, and then I bring them to the appropriate committee and finally to the appropriate board to get us through this process. I believe, members of the board and Mr. Chair, that's both responsive and responsible in terms of how our institutions work and how the legislature has set an expectation for us. So I believe in working with the team here that's the proper course of action as we move forward. In addition to, as you think about what you'd like to see in that 60-day plan, the last thing I would ask the board is for you to think about your role as policy makers and as the fiduciary for this entity. What you've seen described in these audits is what I would call the sort of loose, tight relationship that this system uses in the management of its affairs. And by that I mean, the board has authority to set these policies. You delegate authority for implementation to chancellors, and you delegate authority to presidents. Over the years, and a previous speaker indicated that the system was 1,000 years old. We're not quite that old. The system is 55 years old this year. Over 55 years, that implementation and delegation has sometimes been loose, sometimes been tight. Sometimes there has been an iron chancellor, as my friends like to call me behind my back, and sometimes there has been delegation to the presidents. And so what these audits call out is for you to make a decision as a governance board about the level of that loose, tight delegation of authority. How much of it do you wish to have in the chancellor's office? How much of it do you wish to have at the institution level? And then you as the board set policy accordingly. So absent that, what I would call a point of view about governance, we'll just bring you a bunch of policies that are not coherent in the way they approach this system and the administration of its money. It'll be a bunch of one-offs. And I don't think that's advisable. I think that's how in future audits you get more findings like these, where this has been changed over here, but not over here. So I do think, as I said, I don't know that this is a gift or a blessing. I do think that this is the right thing to do. It's very important. I am very appreciative of the legislative staff. I have rarely seen an audit team this large in all my years in government. There were a lot of auditors who came here to brief me in December. And so I appreciate all the work that they've done, as I appreciate the work of the business officers and the folks at the Chancellor's office, principally Andrew and Joe, who are there with you. So that's what I would ask of you. Think about your governance philosophy and this delegation think about specific things that you've heard that you'd like included in the 60-day plan, and then be prepared for work in March as we as we dot the I's and cross the T's on that plan, because then I have to submit it and I have to be able to represent to money committees in March that it's underway. And then be prepared. You will cast a number of votes over these next months, implementing the findings and recommendations, rather, of these 3 audits. And my commitment to you is I wasn't here when this audit started. I will be gone when the policies are finished. But in the months that I have with you this year, we will get this right. We will make these changes as recommended, and you as the board will have that ultimate authority. It is our job now to bring you the action items as quickly and judiciously as we can. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Acting Chancellor. We appreciate those comments. Regent Arascata, you have a comment or a question?
Actually, Acting Chancellor Arquaga just nailed pretty much every one of them. But as simplistic as this sounds, what is the one recommendation that you would like to have, that you could provide us? The one question, the one suggestion, or the few?
Thank you, Regent Arascata, Mr. Chair, to you and through you to the Vice Chair. It's my question about your view of governance. If I have a recommendation or a request for this board, have a point of view. Don't nickel and dime or piecemeal your way through this. Know that you wish to set guardrails on the authority of the institutions or the authority of the chancellor, and approach every question and every vote with that point of view. That's my request.
Thank you. Are there any other regents who have any questions, or what I should say, any comments before we move to the next agenda item? Just hitting a little bit on what the Acting Chancellor just offered. You know, we have had conversation about intentional areas of focus. And part of those intentional area of focus is student success, student experience and campus growth. And we've had some conversation about what that looks like. And I think we're able to, based on these audit findings, we're going to be able to change some policy and revamp some things that really does support that. And so I think that's very positive in terms of the changes that we're going to be able to make, and we're going to be able to make them pretty quickly. If it's one thing that we have spoke about, not only with board staff, but the chancellor and the chancellor's cabinet, is expediency in time, and that everybody has been buckled in and ready to get to work and move what may look like a manner in which is fast, compared to perhaps maybe how sometimes some things do get done under the umbrella of higher education. And so I'm looking forward to everybody being able to be a part of this as we move forward, and as we move very quickly through the processes that we have to undertake to improve what we have going on, not only as a board, but as a system and within the institutions. We'll jump right now into new business. Are there any regents who have new business requests? Regent Boylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think in another meeting also, I'd mentioned this for some of us who have clients that we have to take care of, et cetera, et cetera. We usually meet on Thursdays and Fridays, and you can set up things ahead of time. I would recommend that the board or somehow we stick to those days for special meetings too. It makes it easier, I would think, it does for me. Then I don't have to talk to people and say, look, I can't help you on a Wednesday because now I've got something more pressing, more important to do. So it's just a request again and a recommendation. It also gives us enough time so that if there's a long weekend, like a Monday in between, and we want to make some changes to any agenda item or come up with another agenda item, we have at least 3 days, because usually Mondays are off, so we have Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe Thursday, and then we have the meeting on a Friday. So just a suggestion, and I'd really appreciate that. I don't know how it affects other members of the board, but I'm just saying it based on, well, we're so used to Thursday, Friday. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other new business? We'll now move into public comment. Is there any public comment in Elko?
There is no public comment in Elko.
Thank you. Is there any public comment in Reno?
Yes, there is, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Good morning, Kent Irvin, State President, Nevada Faculty Alliance. For the record, my name is spelled Kentervin. A take-home message today is that for transparency and accountability, the board needs to delve deeper into institutional level expenditures. Frankly, the statement that the system office on your behalf is not able to directly monitor institutional level accounts in our statewide accounting system will be shocking to legislators and the public. Clearer policies, as you've talked about, will avoid interpretations that stretch the intent of various funds. I've been a department chair in the past. At the program level, managers are faced with spending multiple funds with different uses and time restrictions. It's a complicated Venn diagram. The goal, of course, is to fund the missions of the program in teaching, research, service, outreach, and engagement. That's the main goal we should not lose sight of as new policies are written. Policies need to be balanced and goal-oriented to be effective. Regarding timing, state allocated funds expire at the ends of fiscal years. Revenues from student fees sometimes don't make their way into program accounts until well into a semester or academic year. In the case, for example, of lab course fees, there are regular supply expenses and larger equipment repair and replacement expenses that you have to juggle. If state funds are insufficient for those, then student fees need to be saved up to cover the cost of essential larger expenditures. Of course, specific purpose accounts being used outside of their purpose and not detected by regular reporting or internal audits is a problem that needs to be addressed. If a self-supporting account builds up long-term surplus without a plan, that fee should be flagged for review and possible reduction. That's only fair to the students or user paying those fees. Thank you.
Is there any additional public comment in Reno?
No, there is not.
Thank you. Is there public comment in Las Vegas? There's no public comment in Las Vegas, and this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.